welcome everybody. Thanks for hanging in with us on the second day of Slush. Matt and Timo, welcome to the stage. Thank you for taking the afternoon with us.
Thanks.
I'm excited to have you both here. I think this is a super critical topic that really doesn't get as much attention as maybe the sexy IPO or the funding piece of a startup's journey. So I thought we could just start, Timo, with you. You guys have a pretty distinct story all by yourself. I'm wondering if you could just take us very briefly kind of through the history of the company and kind of what made it unusual and distinct in terms of your approach for making games.
Yeah. So I'm Timo. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Small Giant Games, and we got started back in 2013 with a very small team, and we had this crazy thought that initially 6 people, then 12 people, we could really challenge the big games companies of the world and climb to the top grossing positions, and started developing our first sort of flying game, which is a beautiful game. Launched that back in 2015, failed miserably, and had the courage of actually to stop working on the game, and because it was very clear that this game will not take us, no matter what we do with it, it's not going to take us to this big crazy goal of getting to the top. And at that time our sort of initial funding was sort of running out, and we were in a situation where scarcity creates efficiency. So we talked to the team together and said, look, we better find something very quickly. And we started looking at the market very intensely, really, what is there a market opening, what are our competitors doing, how their games work, what works, what doesn't work. And then a lot of prototyping just to get to the top. And the mission was very clear: how to get to top 100 grossing with a team of 12 people. And fast forward a year from that, Empires and Puzzles had been tested with live users, very good sort of initial numbers. Finally, things started working for us, but we were lacking, seriously lacking capability of doing performance marketing and sort of data analytics at that time. And then we were able to convince EQT Ventures to jump in. We raised $6 million, literally signed a deal on the same day as the game launched. And then, we were able to build our own analytics stack and, this incredible capability of doing really high quality performance marketing. Fast forward again, sort of 16, 18 months from that, we grew from 0 revenue back in 2018 to $190 million in revenue, very profitably. And then the journey continued with Zynga.
Yeah, so let me pause there, because Zynga, pretty well-known brand name, has been through its own sort of distinct journey, both up and bad and then back again. So tell me, where was the company at the point where you joined it, and then talk a little bit about, in terms of thinking about M&A, how you saw that fitting into what I guess I could best describe as kind of the Zynga comeback.
Yeah, so when I joined the company a little more than 3 years ago, the company was essentially worthless in the stock market, which is to say the stock was worth about as much cash as we had, and we owned our building. And that was kind of what it was worth. Yeah, and we sold it now. And so there was a lot of work to do. And buying companies was not the first thing we thought about. It's, in general, a terrible idea to try to fix your own problems by buying another company, and no great company would want to be a part of your company if you've really got a lot of problems yourself. And so we first set about to fix our own business. And after we were able to turn core Zynga around and the games started to work and our company started to be successful, then we did start to think about adding a few select groups of incredibly talented people, and started looking all over the world for those kinds of folks, and eventually we found Timo.
Yeah. And so now you start to reach that point. You guys have been through a struggle, you've come out the other side, you've got a red hot game, you've got some venture funding. So in talking to your investors and thinking internally about where your vision is, where you want to go, what were the options on the table? Not just M&A, but was there a path where you thought, we could be Zynga, we could be a big standalone independent gaming company?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously it is tempting, because already back in 2017, when we were doing in the ballpark of $30-40 million revenue during the first 6 months, we started getting inbound interest from various players, and it was tempting because we had gone through hell and come back. We almost ran out of money, and it was really tough. And of course, we sort of considered even that option for a little while. But luckily, our investors, understood the numbers that our game had, that this game could be one of the big winners. So we did actually a big secondary round in 2018. So we sold part of the company to VCs. So just to calm ourselves and take a little bit of money off the table and reduce risk. But then the hyper growth just continued, and we did have those discussions in the board that could we be an independent company, that could we build become the next Supercell, which eventually got acquired as well. But basically what happened is that the kind of deal structure we were able to sort of craft with Zynga was really interesting, because we are still entrepreneurs. I mean, they acquired 80% of the company. We still own 20%. We have structures in place that basically will incentivize us generously if we perform, which is always the case. So and it took a lot of risk off the table, and our investors were super happy. So. But that was a very, very difficult discussion, actually.
Difficult because you mentioned there's so many options, but I have to believe, certainly, to be a successful entrepreneur, you've got to have some level of ego, some self-belief in your destiny or your ability to execute and succeed on a vision. So, it seems like there's an emotional part too, in terms of letting go and thinking, I've taken this as far as I could take it. And now there's value in not being an independent company.
Yeah, I suppose, for example, one of the options we considered, should we go public? But, luckily that thought went away very quickly, because it's super complicated. You need to have a big portfolio in order to be a successful games company like Zynga. And I think about the emotion, the fact that we were able to retain our independence and, our unique, creative culture, within the broader umbrella. So now we have a super competent team of doing the public market thing. And actually, it was an additional value creation element, so that we figured that we could join Zynga, and the story that there's a huge value creation, that if we plug in our numbers to the mothership and they do their thing, that a lot of good things will happen. And, that's why we took actually quite a considerable amount of the consideration in stock. Of Zynga stock, and that turned out to be a great choice, because company has been performing extremely well.
So Matt, on your side of things, was it flat out the success, the phenomenon of this game that put them on your radar, or had you guys been following them through your different channels?
Yeah, it's not unusual for us to spend a lot of time and really get to know folks before a transaction, and I think in Timo's case, we probably have been at least 18 months, maybe longer, from the beginning of the time we began talking to them to the time we consummated a transaction. In a couple of those moments in time when they decided to raise money and do other things, we had been hanging around and kind of poking and seeing if we could do a deal. And so each of those times we spent more and more time together. And so by the time that Small Giant decided they were on to sell the company, we already knew them pretty well, and we had a pretty good idea that we were culturally aligned, and that it would work out. So we were very confident at that point, and that made it a lot easier.
Yeah, and so during that kind of longer courtship, where you don't necessarily have, you're not leading that discussion, saying, "Hey, we'd like to buy you. Let's have a chat." It's more like, "Let's get to know you and get to know each other, and then see where this goes." You're probably aware then other people are out there, knocking on their door, and things are ramping up. So, in terms of the imperative or the urgency, does that force you to kind of shift that and feel like, okay, we gotta pull the trigger here, we gotta do something, because?
Well, I don't even think I've ever told you this, Timo. We actually had someone sit in the coffee shop outside across the street from their offices and watch the door to see who was coming in and out, see if we could figure out who else was coming in. So yeah, it's a competitive process, and you want to win.
Yeah.
But
sounds like a very sexy job, by the way.
Yeah, well, I won't say who it was, but you definitely know who it was. That's not their only job. They had other jobs too. But you want to win, but you want to win the right way, and you want to win for the right reasons. And that's, I think, the mistake that a lot of companies make when they do M&A is they get into the game of the transaction and imagine that the transaction is the point of the whole thing. When in fact, the point is the next 3 years or 5 years. It's not getting to the finish line of the transaction. So if you get to the finish line in the wrong way and you've established the wrong kinds of relationships and processes and given people the wrong idea, or you've structured the deal in the wrong way, then when the transaction closes, you think you've won, but you've actually screwed yourself.
Yeah.
And so you have to do the transaction with the rest of your life in mind. And that might not always be initially the most attractive thing to the company that's selling. And so the point is to try to get to know them well enough so that you have an understanding about that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's 100% true, because we were in a lucky position that we started getting offers and whispers from basically, if not all, but very many of the top games companies in the world, and it was kind of a crazy situation for us because we were like hyper growth mode, and we're very profitable. We didn't need to do anything, and a lot of people started throwing pretty sort of tempting sort of cash offers, and we said that, hey, look, we just launched our game about a year ago. All indicators are showing that this can be one of the big games in the world for years to come, and we don't want to sell now because we're just getting started, and we love what we do. We want to stay together. We have a unique team and blah blah blah. And some of the big companies, just didn't get it. They could not understand that this is a life journey. It's a bit of a hobby. It's our life that we're building. So coming back to your emotional part, that I think some of the contenders actually, from a deal perspective, probably missed out on that because they just didn't understand those sensitivities. And it was kind of bizarre to hear that some of them were not thinking about the future. Because, and
I think part of it is a lot of times you don't have operating people doing the deals, and so the deal people haven't operated businesses, and so they don't know what's going to happen next, and so they're not sensitive to those things. And the other thing is that what Timo was saying is that he was saying, gee, it's kind of amazing that people weren't really interested or didn't really care what they needed and wanted and why. It is kind of amazing, but I will tell you that it is true. Like most companies don't think really hard authentically about wanting other people to be successful and how they can do that. And it turns out for us, and we've done now 4 deals, to be a real differentiator in the market. It sounds stupid. It sounds like not something that should be a differentiator, but actually caring about other people and doing what you say and being reliable and being transparent and just trying to be a decent person turns out to be a big market differentiator.
Well, okay, and so then there's that human side, and you guys get to know each other. There's sort of a genuine personal, corporate culture connection there, and then you come around to actually doing the deal. Timo, you've made some references to this, but specifically in terms of the way this is structured, you guys technically bought 80% of the company with some incentives then over the next 3 years. So how difficult, so you want to have that connection and that trust, and at the same time, you want to kind of cover your ass a little bit and make sure that structurally what's on paper kind of also gives you some peace of mind, so to speak, that Matt leaves or some executive change or something happens, yes, you've still got a structure in place that reflects the spirit of what you had. So how was this a template for you guys that you've used before, or was this the process of kind of talking through how do we really craft something that really reflects the spirit of what we're...
Well, I would say the most important thing is in that process is to try to come to a place where you actually do want the same thing, right? So the mistake that a lot of folks make in these structures is that, the company thinks, well, I'm going to be really clever. I'm going to try to structure this so that I don't end up paying that much, or if the other company stumbles a little bit or something doesn't go wrong, then I'll reduce my risk and hope that I'm paying less. And I'll put in little tricky things in the deal that maybe people don't really understand, but because I've been around a while, I do get it, and there's going to be landmines. And then later, the entrepreneurs, especially younger entrepreneurs who haven't been through it, will discover, oh my goodness, I just got screwed, and well, how did that happen, right? And you'd be amazed, but it's not unusual if people do that. Our view from the beginning was to find out, it was to want them to be successful, right? To want the entrepreneurs to make as much money as they can, and that we were going to work really hard to make that possible, as opposed to being on the other side of the transaction and hoping, even subconsciously, for something to go wrong.
Right.
Yeah, so that was really important for us because, as I mentioned, we were just getting started, and we knew that a lot of the value will be coming through over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and hence sort of the 80% deal where you guys will buy the remaining 20% over the next period of next 3 years, based on certain EBITDA multiples. That really keeps us going. I mean, we are as 100%. Entrepreneurs, probably even more now. That's a very clear sort of mechanic for us. So that was important. But it was also about joining. I think the other side of things that maybe might be interesting for people, that we had this glimpse of other folks out there as well. Then we also figured that it is important to be part of a meaningful future. So that, let's say that the buyer had been one of those behemoths of with tens of billions or of market cap, and even if we were performing really well, we would be still a tiny little part of that company. And whereas with Zynga, we felt that, hey, look, we got a glimpse of what Gram Games and recent acquisition just before us, and some of the internal studios were doing, and we did our own math. That look, if we plug in our numbers into the equation and the rest of the company as well, a lot of good things come out of that. So we were part of it. It wasn't just us, selfishly trying to optimize our own thing, but to optimize for the greater good, which actually turned out to be a great sort of a value kicker for us.
And so there's the contractual incentive part, but then there's also the organizational way that you've set this up. Now, again, let's talk a little bit about that. Yes. In terms of your autonomy or semi-autonomy, however you describe it.
So obviously, I mean, it's a good point that obviously we were in direct negotiation with Matt and his colleagues, but obviously it was carefully crafted in the contract, so that these things that we talked about and we agree on, they are now very clearly stipulated in the contract that lawyers on both sides made sure that they hold water and they are there. So even if someone leaves the individual leaves the equation, so we both sides have a clear certainty that this is going to happen, and there are no and you mentioned the other thing about this integrity and not trying to screw the other party on the deal, but doing a really sort of transparent deal, spending time and understanding, is this exactly what we both want?
And we also spent a lot of time with Timo and his partners just being super specific about what it would be like, on the Monday afterwards, down to how often would I call him? How long would we talk? What would we talk about? Where, do you, with each of, not just Timo, but with this whole management team, what are the kinds of things we would be sensitive about? What are the kinds of things we're not sensitive about? And just so that there was, I think in the end, there were very few parts of it that were a surprise. By the time we got to the end, we were ready, we were ready to go.
Yeah, but in that same measure, thinking about Zynga, you've got this company kind of on this now comeback, doing well, reestablishing itself. To have this, I don't know if federated structure is quite the right word, but, Yeah,
people have said city-states or something.
Yeah, I mean, but having this sort of, they're Zynga, but you're giving them some autonomy, so does that risk, they're continue to grow, maybe they'll make great new games after this as well, that people don't associate that with the brand, or how they do associate it with the brand?
Our business is essentially a creative business, right? And that means that what you do is you go out in the world and you find groups of extraordinary teams of creative people wherever they might live, whatever they're doing. And what you need to try to do is nurture those teams and keep them together and try to make them happy. And that's relatively straightforward. What gets in the way are the kinds of things that you made mention of are mostly ego-driven. They're mostly around, am I going to get enough credit for that? Does it seem like Timo's really good and Small Giant's really good, but maybe we're not a big enough part of that? And when you start to think about those things, you just end up doing the wrong things. Yeah. We're not insecure about the fact that they're great. That's why we're doing deals. We think we can be helpful from time to time. I think we are. When we're not helpful, we don't help. And when we can be helpful, we try to help. And ultimately, we work together in a business, and it is part of Zynga, and we want them to continue to have their own identity, because that's what makes them great. The worst thing you can possibly do, and people say this all the time, but they don't really understand it. The worst thing you could do is find great talent and that are really happy doing things a certain way, and then force them to do something different. It's literally nonsensical, but yet it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And it's mostly just not having an ego about it.
Yeah. So now we're not quite a year since the deal was announced. Being part of Zynga, what would you concretely sort of point to as kind of what upside it's had for you, or how it's impacted either the visibility or the trajectory of the game, and what you're thinking about doing next?
Yeah, let's start with it was kind of amazing because, obviously we were super afraid when the, even with these guys that, what really happens afterwards. And I think, we were really concerned about, all kinds of, corporate bureaucracy that would creep in and slow us down and make people demotivated, that, even people would leave the company and all that stuff, and we were really concerned about it. But I think, we jointly sort of found really good solutions. For example, one practical thing that, you guys appointed a point man in San Francisco who was sort of handling all communications towards us, because, Matt, you mentioned this really funny thing that, you had a sort of acquisition team at Zynga, which I think had more people in that acquisition team than the whole team of Small Giant, because we were like 24 people anyways. And we said, even if all of these people in this particular group started sending emails to Small Giant members with good intentions, that would slow us. We would be just answering emails. And the one sort of very clever trick to have one point man who sort of coordinated that. Look, let's not bother these people enough, and it worked super well for us. So that's one part. And then the practicality is that it is fantastic that we've been able to continue to do it independently. We are in certain areas we're really good at, but for example, in this super complex area of data analytics, that we've been able to tap into some of the extra brains from the mothership to help us to solve incredibly complex problems, get a second or third or fifth opinion on things, and then there's a lot of leverage points in areas of purchasing power, joining, Zynga's, total sort of purchasing and negotiation power to different kinds of deals. But those are the kind of things that we could have perhaps done, on our own, but not at this efficiency level. Yeah. So, but it's been working quite well.
And part of the reason why we were confident that we could be helpful, and this is, it's not really a secret, it's not a process thing as much, but we were super confident that the folks that we had at Zynga were great and were A+ people. And I think one of the problems you often find in an acquisition context is you find great teams and you acquire them and they're A+ people. And then if the people in your company aren't at that level and you send them over to help, then the first thing that happens is the target thinks, oh, this is a disaster, right? And you're off on the wrong foot immediately. So you have to be careful not to send people if they're not needed. And if they are needed, you have to be confident that the people you're going to send are going to be good enough that they're actually going to add value to these great teams. And if you are confident in that, then you can be relaxed and know it's going to work out. And that's not so much it's not so much a process thing, but it's like you've got to have a great organization if you want to join up with other great organizations. Otherwise, they're not going to want to be a part.
So then, on your side, do you feel like, or are people coming to you in the organization with saying, Matt, I kind of have some thoughts about what these guys are doing, or
it happens all the time. Happens all the time.
And did you have to kind of restrain that and say, well, or figure out a way to how do we go to Timo and say these guys had this interesting thought without suddenly Timo being like, oh, here it comes.
Well, it happens all the time. Everybody thinks they're a game designer in the world, and everyone who plays a game thinks they know how that game could be better. And maybe they do, right? Because we all play games, and so it's like on some level our opinion is all valid, but that doesn't make everybody's opinion equally valid. Some people's job it is to make this game, and what you need to realize is that it's unlikely that you, no matter how smart and experienced you are going to think of something that people who eat, drink, and sleep something, who thought about it 24 hours a day for several years, if they haven't thought about it, it's unlikely that you're going to come up with a magic idea, right? Having said that, there are good ideas, and there are ways that we can help, and kind of taking the energy of that organization and knowing how and when to ask the small giant guys about it, when to sort of attach a process to it, and managing that piece is a kind of a big part of what managing, in the post-acquisition world is about.
Yeah. So for us, obviously we do get, opinions, from everyone, not just these guys. But I think specifically with sometimes we do get, sort of, questions or opinions from, from the leadership as well. And it said sometimes we says, we are, we're all ears because we genuinely, think that good ideas come from anywhere. Sometimes we just use that, the line is really bad, you're breaking up, we can't really understand you, and then we just...
Finnish people are, they're not as concerned about offending you, right? So they'll just say, thank you. And then that's it. Then to move on. It's not hard to
My English is not so good. Sorry.
Exactly.
We value your opinion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you much for your contributions.
The other reason I think I was excited to talk to you guys about this. I mean, the reality is, as an entrepreneur, it's pretty rare. I've met them, but it's pretty rare that really someone gets passionate about something, building something, creating something, with the goal of heading towards an acquisition. The reality is, if you succeed, if you get some traction, if you're growing, and there's going to be an exit, probably 80, 90, 95% of those exits are going to be acquisitions. And you were sort of mentioning this, then most of those will fail, which is sort of this strange tragedy of the whole tech ecosystem. This is once your best moment, you've succeeded, investors love you, and there's a pretty good chance that you've probably taken a step that likely will be fatal.
Yeah.
So, in thinking about that, was that something that you were also conscious of?
So, I mean, that was, when we discussed with the team about this, I think, this continuation was really, really important. Because, we have a lot of people, who love what they're doing. We're still a very young company. And we did have a lot of discussion about this, because, it shouldn't be the end. Like, it should be a new beginning, a new, different type of beginning. In our case, it's almost exactly the same. Nothing really changed that much. I mean, we're using the same identity. Small Giant. We have our own culture. We consolidated the numbers, and we're getting some help. But it was actually a surprisingly good deal for us, and that's why we chose Zynga, because we saw very different approaches from some of the Asian folks, some of the other American parties that who had. Very little sympathy, or they felt super stiff to start with, or the other thing, the understanding of the games business as such, and the underlying mathematics, the analytics of the game. There were parties who were not so deep in mobile games, if you like, and so that was also important, that you are now part of a group of like-minded people who, roughly speaking, think about the world in same terms as you are.
It's important. This is the more context you have, and the better you understand someone's business, the less fear and anxiety you have about it. Yeah. So when things go wrong, and they inevitably do go wrong, because we've been in this business a long time, we operate lots of games, we generally understand that there's nothing to panic about, and we work through it, and we move on. And the other piece is that, they were, Small Giant was not the first deal we did at Zynga. We've done 4 or 5 deals in increasing size, and we learned each time and got a little better at it each time, and figured out a little bit more how to partner effectively around this stuff, and we're still learning. And so we try to be open-minded each time, and go through a postmortem after a deal and still say, hey, what parts of this were painful for you? In fact, the company we bought before Small Giant, Graham Games, I sat down with those guys and I said, please explain to me all the things that have been painful or difficult for you since we bought the company. And one of the founders ended up writing me like a 10-page list, and it was amazing, because almost everything on it was just something that someone did by accident, or because we didn't understand. And we were able to hone that each time, and so it's been much less painful for Timo. It'll be not painful at all for the next person, and you just have to want to invest in it, and you have to want to be good at it, because it's an art.
All right, so I think we're just about out of time. I want to thank you both for sharing your stories. It's fascinating stuff. And if we could, let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.